This is one of those issues that I think really highlights our understanding of our audience. They are some of the smartest, brightest, and in many cases, hopeful people we've ever met.
Resourceful, yes.
Resourceful, but I don't know that we're fully equipped to deal with this.
No.
This is different.
Welcome to the Rich and Regular podcast, where we explore life at the intersection of money. I'm Kirsten.
And I'm Julien. And today we're talking about what we've learned during our journey to find my mom affordable housing. This very similar to the last podcast episode that we did. I believe, I don't know, it might be a short one. It might be a long one. I'm not really sure. I feel like I gave a very similar disclaimer the last time. I think it is one that is also personal. And so pardon me if I, go on a little ramble or get a little sensitive, or if Kirsten gets a little sensitive. It's one that is, unresolved, for being honest. I mean, even though we've recently had a win, like even me saying that, it still feels like while we've made progress in some ways, there's still a lot of work to be done. But very similar to the last one, our goal is to introduce this topic as one of concern, because I just have a nagging little feeling that a lot of people, certainly that I know for sure, and so I would imagine those that are listening and watching may be thinking that this might be them, but they may find out that the day of reckoning comes sooner than you anticipated. And so we're hoping to educate those who might be in a similar situation or are thinking that they'll get there, and share a little bit of what we've learned along the way.
Yeah, I think this is your version of life at the intersection of money, because when you think about this issue and when you think about the things that derail people from their financial plans, it is stuff like this. Everybody has a plan till they get punched in the face, and your parent not having a stable place to live is a punch in the face, especially for men. Not to gender the issue, but there are a lot of little black boys that grow up to be men whose dream is to buy their mama a house. Like, that's the sign of making it. And, this is just a complicated issue. So I wanted to do this episode because I haven't seen very much content, if any content like it. A lot of the conversation around affordable housing is focused at the policy, high level, macro perspective. It's things like what we can learn from other countries, what big policy statement do we need? What are states doing to create more affordable housing? But very little is focused on how the existing system works for those who can't afford to wait. And so if you are a day one, you are OG, you've been listening to us or reading us since 2017, you've kind of followed this journey. But I'm going to give you a quick backstory. Chime in any areas that I'm missing. But this is like a high level bullet point of like how long this issue has persisted in our lives and all the things that we've tried up until now. So it started when our son was born in 2017. Julien's mom retired. And in that time, she watched him 3 days a week, and we paid her, which subsidized her income because she had very little retirement savings, like the equivalent of an emergency fund in retirement savings. And then she had her Social Security, which she had taken early, so that was not enough. And then she had our check, which is kind of what kept her afloat as a homeowner.
She was a homeowner at the time.
Yes. Yeah, she was a homeowner, and she had bought her house in 2009, like the aughts?
Yeah, it was in the early 2000s, I believe, somewhere around that ballpark.
So her mortgage was not unreasonable.
No, and she had been there for a while, very much settled into her community and surrounded by a lot of people like her, right? Like on the outskirts of Atlanta in a small suburb. Got her little land, got her little house, and you couldn't tell her nothing. She was happy. Even though she was also quite miserable and stressed out because, there's always something, right? Like if you're a homeowner, there's always something, and you're stressing out about, one day something breaking and it becoming this major issue. So there was that going on in the background. But generally speaking, between, having a home, having the little, I don't want to call it a subsidy, but the money that we were offering her in addition to her savings that she could tap, as needed, I think was enough for her. And I think she thought that she was good, that she would not have to worry about anything like ever again.
Yes. So when Bo was about a year and a half, this was the end of 2018, we decided to put him into daycare, which stopped the subsidy, and she started really stressing out. She started feeling the financial pressures because the house needed repairs. She needed knee surgery. Like there was just a number of things that she had on her list that she wasn't able to do because the Social Security was just barely floating her.
Right.
And so in 2019, after a series of conversations, she decides that she's ready to sell the house because that was the big pushback, was she did not want to leave this house, but that's where all of her wealth was. That's where all of the money that she had. It was in the equity, which was not liquid as long as she lived there.
Correct.
So in 2019, she decides to sell the house, and she decides to go with Open Door, which at the time was making like cash offers.
Well, you gotta, so let me pause here and then, just add a little bit of context, right? So you're right. Like after several, and you call them conversations. I mean, some of them were pretty aggressive conversations, strong worded, counsel, and saying, hey man, like, like this is where it is, right? In fact, I would go so far as to say, like, even before that, man, maybe 6 or 8 years before that, it was a flat out, what do they call it when you confront someone that you think may be struggling with addiction?
Intervention.
It was like a financial intervention. I was like, look, I'm pretty sure that there's more to this story going on. And she just was not giving me the signs that she kind of had it all under control. But I think I was where a lot of people are right now, where they're smart enough to recognize that they're not getting the signals of confidence that they need. But there's also just like that parallel layer of respect that you have for this person in your life. You want to respect them as your parent. You want to respect them as an adult that just deserves privacy and maybe even pushing back a little bit. And so that, I will say, is likely at the heart of so many of these issues, because you allow that respect to linger for so long, and it makes, assuming there is a crack in the foundation, the financial foundation, right? It just gets worse and worse and worse until you're forced to deal with an issue and you realize, like, oh my gosh, I wish I could have gone back and done something or fixed something or prepared for something before. And so I share all of that to say, my spidey sense and radar had been on 10 for like greater part of like 7 years at this point. And I've been making the recommendation, like, you need to sell. Like, that's where the money is. I'm sorry, I get it. Like, you always wanted to own a home, but like that chapter looks like it's closing, right? Like right now, the home is actually making you miserable. And, you have an opportunity to sell, to cash out. And so, imagine being in that situation where it feels like the walls are closing in on you. And then you open your mailbox, and Open Door was very clear to say, hey, you call me right now, I'll put this money in your hand the next day.
Yes.
And so it was very real. Like you could see the impact. Oh, it was like a miracle.
A miracle.
It felt like a true angel flew into the mailbox and said, I can make all your problems
as is.
As is. Don't you worry about fixing anything.
Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it. We'll strike through all that. Here's what we'll pay you right now.
Yeah.
And she
took it. Absolutely. So this was in 2019, and later that year, she moved into a government-subsidized senior living facility with a bunch of equity in the bank. It was the happiest day of her life, as you've heard us say several times.
I think I don't want to say live stream. I don't even think live streaming was a thing at the time, but I was like live story.
You were
telling the entire experience. And it was the day of moving her out of this home. And I apologize for anyone that's like, man, get to it. But like, it matters, man. It's like when you're standing and that Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, that last scene where he's standing there looking at the house. And that was me looking at this house that I don't want to say I grew up in, but like I spent a lot of time in. And I knew that, like, I remember when she moved into it, and I know what it represented in her heart. And I'm standing in the living room and I'm like, yeah, but at the same time, I know that she's been stressing about that window. I know she's been stressing about that little spot right there and
kitchen.
On the roof,
the
kitchen,
patio door.
I go down to the basement, and I'm like, man, this entire thing is like a dream unfulfilled. Like, they bought the house. It was like, oh, well, we'll finish the basement. You never get around to it because it's not enough time or money. So yeah, all of that was kind of closing in, and I was just like taking as many pictures as possible, and I triggered a lot of people that day because I was like, that's my mama's house, that's my mama, I went through that, or oh my god, I think I'm getting ready to go through that. So
And that was the first time she actually had to downsize her things. Like, it was the first time she was willing to get rid of it, which was a whole other, it's a whole different.
I'll skip that
because we've got several things to say about that part.
Yes.
But point is, she moved in 2019, at the end of 2019. And then in 2020, the pandemic hits.
Yeah.
And because she was in a senior living facility, because those facilities were hit so hard, her mental health took a huge toll. The living environment took a huge toll.
I think it felt like she was living in a hospice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Every day she was seeing people being carted out or ambulances roll up. They had eliminated visitations.
It felt like it was coming through the walls, right? Like, you got to think, it was early 2020.
We were still wiping down groceries.
It felt like I'm surrounded by it. I feel like, don't come see me. You know what I mean? It was.
She was scared for her grandson. So, like, she didn't want us to come see her. She didn't want to come see him. We couldn't get to it. And then they had stopped all of the amenities, all of the reasons that she had moved into a senior living facility, from the game nights to the shared lunches, all that stuff quit.
Yeah, naturally,
because they were trying to stop the spread. So that was 2020. Eventually, vaccines rolled out. 2021, the world opens up, her lease ends, and we decide, like, in order to repair the damage, we're going to move her closer to us. And we did an extensive search, but ultimately we landed on this apartment that was less than a mile from us. It is a luxury apartment in the area. It had all the amenities. Like, it was a total 360, not even a 180, just a total 360 from where she was coming from. And at the time, she got a 2-bedroom because we expected our son to spend time there. And so her rent was around $1,800, $1,900 for 2 bedrooms.
It sounds crazy right now.
Listen,
I was like, I wish.
Say that for a reason.
I wish.
Yeah, we were subsidizing over half of it every single month, because her cap was around, $800, $900 was a stretch when you're living off of a fixed income Social Security payment. So we were covering half of it, and we were happy to do it because we wanted to see her better.
Yeah.
So she stayed there, and then inflation hit, as y'all know, as my renters know, inflation hit, and her rent rose to $2,300. And so we decided, like, all right, this is getting mortgage levels. And we moved her into a smaller unit, which saved us a couple $100 every month. And then rent rose again to like $1,900.
Which we knew, right?
Which we knew. We were buying time.
It was a matter of just buying time and just like trying to stop the bleeding a little bit and maintain baseline level of quality of life.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we just kept trying to find units within that building. The management team was working with us, and all of these things were just saving a couple $100 a month. Like, they were not making the effect that we needed, the impact that we needed. No. Like, it was just buying us a little more time until we figured out this solution.
Yeah.
And after this last move, we decided, like, something needs to change. This is the last time we're going to keep units swapping. Like, we need to find a more permanent solution, because now moving was having a hard time, because every time she moved, she would need to set up mail again and get rid of more stuff and pull stuff off the wall that she had installed. And so that was taking a toll as well. I think we underestimate how, at that age, permanence and home and not feeling like you're bouncing around matters.
Yeah, the word security, right? We talk about it, in terms of like macro trends, and I'm actually getting ready to highlight a few of those, but like, it's one thing to talk about that as a bit of an economic label. It's another thing to see it up front and to really know what it looks like and how it impacts the psyche and somebody's overall wellness. I plan to like react to the kind of reenactment of it all. And like I said, I mean, it's so emotionally triggering for me. Even like knowing that we're talking about it, like, I'm struggling, because even now I'm still trying to respect her privacy and trying to find this balance between what we're talking about and helping those who I know for a fact are where we were before, where we were, right? Like, haven't even had a confrontation or conversation. Like, they're still just kind of trusting that their mom, their dad, and or both are on top of it and they'll figure it out, only to be met with like a brutal reality. But all of that to say, I think what the big thing for us was also trying to find this balance between what you mentioned earlier, which was like a great sense of pride, which, like, looking back, it's still, a really important decision, one that we decided to do, and it wasn't an easy one. We were like concerned about where to draw the line and how to actually even just conduct the transactions to give her the autonomy that she needs just as an adult. Like there's so many layers to caregiving and these kinds of issues. But I think the big thing for us, I think, came later on when we decided that, this is a team effort and it can't just be that we need to find other ways to like open up another pocket or another pocketbook or like tap something else out or, earn more on the business. Like it was just impacting everything. And so finally it boiled down to, well, you need to go back to work, right? You're physically capable. And if you're not physically capable, then we need to find ways to develop skills that allow you to earn income in other ways. For those, to your point, that have been riding with us for a while, we talked about this in the financial technology toolkit as we were introducing that topic, I believe, because we were dealing with it in a very real way. And so that was in part what inspired us creating that tool. And we'll put the link in the bio again for anyone else that wants it or needs it. But like this plays a role in all of those things. And so all of that to say, I think there are a couple of things that really brought these issues now, and I'll just briefly summarize. One is that when you start to see really sharp, like steep increases in apartment rental rates year over year, like these were not like small jumps. They were really, really steep jumps. And that in a lot of cases, one adds financial stress, emotional stress, but it also kind of feels exploitative a little bit. And I think as people who are kind of on the receiving side of that, I can relate to that feeling. And I certainly know that my mom had that similar feeling as well.
And I think a lot of homeowners are removed from the process because we see that apartment rents go up $100 and we think like, okay, we'll just cut back on something. The problem is if you want to move, most apartments require you to have 3 times the rent. So every $100 increase in rent needs to match a $300 increase in income.
Yeah.
And so the problem was not that she couldn't pay for an apartment or that we couldn't continue to subsidize. It's that she wouldn't be able to qualify anywhere on her own. We would always have to co-sign, which is an impact to our credit, to a number of our financial metrics. And it's unfair to her. It's unfair. It's for her to feel like she is dependent on us before she legally is.
Yeah.
There will be a point where she's dependent on us for real, for real. I mean, she kind of is now, but like there's a difference. And we wanted to preserve that autonomy as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was part of what the issue was in terms of sparking the search for senior living communities. But even once you get there, then you start to realize, all right, this is what I'm having to choose from, right? So of those that are affordable, guess what? Like get in line because there are people who started this process maybe 5 years before you, and they've been waiting impatiently to get that exact same apartment. And so you're going to have to deal with that issue. The second part is as you look at the less affordable, dare I say, more expensive options. I mean, you could just put the more expensive one. Like there's that as an issue as a whole. So like if you got it like that and you're ready to spend like Ivy League college money for a senior citizen to allow them to live and enjoy life comfortably, you're more than welcome to do that. But you've got this in between, which is still pretty expensive housing. And they offer all of these things round the clock care and amenities, but like it's still really, really expensive.
There is no middle class.
There's no
solution.
middle. Yeah.
There is like, either $7,000 to $8,000 a month.
There's no, to your point, there's no middle ground. And I think that's in part what I think a lot of people are not prepared for. I was even shocked. I wasn't surprised, but I was shocked that there just wasn't really anything in between. It was like you're either in the hood or right adjacent to the hood, or you're lucky and you found a tiny little pocket, but inventory is really, really slim. Or there's like, oh, well, there's a nice place over there. And it's like, oh, yeah, let's go check it out. And it's like, once you see that that number, it's
like, I'm sorry, how much? $5,000?
That's
well,
impossible.
It comes with meals and it comes with, round the clock care and it comes with all these things. And it's like, I didn't want amenities. I just wanted her amongst senior citizens.
It doesn't exist.
And the way that we solved it was just putting her in regular apartments. But that meant that she was with little kids who are stomping around, people at the pool throwing parties, which she did not mind for a while. But again, ultimately, she wants something quiet. She wants something where she feels safe to walk around. She wants something where she doesn't have to climb stairs. And it was just difficult to find that in the private sector that was also affordable enough for her to qualify using Social Security only as income that didn't require a cosigner. And so it's a major problem.
It is. And so I will pause here because any attempt that I or we try to make to try to summarize this issue is not going to do it justice.
Yeah.
Thankfully, AARP is on top of this, and they have a report. It is called the AARP Future of Housing Report. It's like a series of smaller reports that are kind of rolled up into one. And I think this is really, really helpful for anyone that just wants to dive into it. So we'll link to it in the show notes and in the YouTube descriptions. But basically, they identified 7 mega trends that are shaping the future of housing that are impacting seniors. Number one is advances in technology. And I was so glad to see that because, again, this is something that as caregivers, we were starting to see is like a very real issue. And so advances in technology, meaning you've got housing that becomes available, but if you have someone who's not savvy or knows how to, search the internet or how to manage, submitting things online and can manage their inbox, like those things may seem basic to you as a millennial or a Gen Z or something like that. But if you're talking about someone that's in their 70s, they probably aren't really sure how to do that. And I'm not trying to diss, I'm just saying this is like the realities of the issue. And so what happens is what's required in order to get the thing that you need, there's a very real barrier there because you don't have the ability or the know-how to actually do it. Number two was affordability gaps. We talked about that, meaning like, yes, there are some things that are available, some housing that's available, but like whether or not you can afford it is another issue. Number three was changing demographics. And this is basically the fact that people are actually living longer. Mm-hmm. And they have underfunded retirements, right? So it makes sense. If you saved enough because you really only expected to live until 75, only to find out that advances in technology and your healthy habits are going to lead you to live until 95, you've got a 20-year gap in terms of your financial needs and housing needs that there is practically no solution for other than bare bones level of government assistance. And that in and of itself is a podcast in and of itself, right? So we're just going to say that there's more. Number 5 is shifts in environmental conditions. This is another way of saying the impact of climate change on housing and infrastructure. We did a podcast episode about this. I'm not even sure how long ago. And till this day, I still think that it is overlooked with the exception of people who live in Florida, who are dealing with this issue right now and have been for the last 5 years. But what's basically happening is the increase of extreme weather is deteriorating infrastructure and deteriorating homes at a faster pace. And it's just shifting where these new places even pop up or where existing places are that just suddenly tend to go into disrepair sooner than, let's say, a real estate developer or owner even wanted to address it, right? And it just creates this crisis that has very real impacts on people who actually are reliant on those homes. Number 6 was supply mismatch, which is basically saying like there's huge demand and not enough houses, not enough homes, not enough
and not just
homes.
like number of houses. It's houses that are based on the needs of the buyer.
Just about to say, because we're talking about this from a standpoint of senior citizens, but we're not factoring in that many of them are also disabled. Yes. And so like you've got a home and maybe there's a home that's available, but if it's only on the second floor, that's not going to work for you. Right. Or if it doesn't have an elevator, or if the elevator is all the way down there, it doesn't really work for you. Like imagine, bringing groceries up. You can't.
If all the inventory is in downtown San Francisco, correct, but your doctor is 40 miles away and you need to be there twice a week for dialysis, it's not going to work. Yeah. So it has to be the right kind of housing in the right area for the right type of person. And that level of thought hasn't been there.
No. The last one, the 7th mega trend, according to AARP's Future of Housing report, is what they just call systemic barriers. And that's some of the things that we've spoken about here and there, the issues related to people of color. I mean, again, like underfunded, underpaid, all of those things, disabled people, veterans, like all of these systemic barriers that have a negative impact on certain groups of people that make existing issues even more challenging. And so those are the 7 issues, even just in retelling the story of our experience in trying to support my mom. I mean, I can think of maybe 3 or 4 of them, right, that just like have met us in our lives in a very, very real way. But one of the big things that they mentioned in this report, and if you're looking for one line to help illustrate just how big of an issue this is or how urgent of an issue it is, then it's this. And this is a direct quote. What it all boils down to is by 2030, which 5-6
Around
years
the corner.
away,
Yeah.
there will be a severe shortage in accessible and affordable housing to meet the need of 1 in 5 Americans over the age of 65. That actually seems low to me.
It does.
But this is
and the severity seems
I
displaced.
think it's urgent right now.
It is.
If I'm being honest. And it's not to say that it doesn't become an issue by 2030. I would imagine there's certain parts of the country that are far more severe. I'm sure there's certain parts of the city that we live in that are more severe.
We've talked about elder homelessness being at its highest levels since I don't know when, decades ago. But like for something to be severe in 2030, it doesn't mean that it all of a sudden switches to severe on December 31st at midnight. Yeah. It means it's pretty bad right now.
It's pretty bad
and
right now.
And they're going to update the label in 2030 if these trends continue. But it's bad. And, again, this is why we wanted to talk about it, because it is an emotional journey. It's not something that you can just continue to throw money at forever unless, I don't even it's not solvable for a family without some level of sacrifice, without some level of giving up on something that you had a plan for.
Yeah.
So let's move forward on the story, because last October or November, she got a call from this new build affordable housing community in our area, about a mile from where we had put her before, and they were having an open house. I mean, just like total miracle of a call and situation and timing. She went to the open house, loved it, filled out an application on the spot, very, very excited, like a true Christmas miracle.
Yeah.
Last week in July is when she moved in. So this has been an 8 to 9 month process with lots of emotions and lessons in between.
Oh, yeah.
And what our hope is for the rest of the podcast is just to share some of the lessons for people who are preparing to go through this or who might just need a heads up on this to begin with.
Yeah.
So the first one that I want to stress is around communication, because there are so many layers involved in this process, including your parent. But I'm just going to focus on the organizational structure of affordable housing because it's so layered. So anytime there is assisted living, subsidized housing, any sort of government program, you're talking about a 3-way partnership between the owner/landlord, the government, and the tenant. And depending on the owner/landlord, there might be this 4th element, which is the management company or the leasing company that they hired to run the day-to-day operations. But I say this because asking for names is so critical, because the turnover is crazy across all levels. So part of the delay for us, again, 9-month process, part of the delay for us was that the management company, not the owner and developer of the unit, but the management company changed twice. So just totally different teams. And then the leasing agents that your mom was working with turned over 5 or 6 times. They would come for a couple of weeks, be like, this is crazy. Like, this is way too many touch points. People are angry. People are asking me for answers. I just got here. I'm out. So they turned over like 5 or 6 times. And when we would ask for an update from your mom, to no fault of her own, she would just say they said, they told me, I was told. And it's like, who said? Who is they? Who is whoever?
The lady in the office.
The lady in the office, the lady on the phone. And so on top of that, they've got these regional heads, they've got these third-party vendors that they work with. And so it is so important, especially early in the process where we're talking about applications, visits, deposits being paid, application fees being paid, that you're as involved as possible, and that you always remind your parent to get a business card, write it down on a sticky note. Just make sure you have a name and you understand who that person works for within whatever organization or building that you're working with.
I think this is important for a couple of reasons, but also there's a tendency, I believe, for people to be a bit naive while they're learning through this process, right? Like, you don't really know. This is your first time doing it. You assume that there's a system or a process
Yes.
and it's like they're baby, but to your point, the system or the process for this company is going to be different from the next company. And in our case, it was several companies. And so you might get a different timeline or a different quote, or someone say, oh, well, it's been submitted, or no, we have everything we need, or I think we do, or like it creates so much chaos and makes what in your mind seems like a pretty simple process like so much more complex.
Yes.
And I think that just adds another layer to the frustration and just how long this is. So do not walk into this process expecting efficiency.
No, all of the incentives for efficiency are gone. We're not talking about a public market where the rent is the incentive. You can raise the rent, and whoever got the money, you have an incentive to get them in because it's like they're willing to pay whatever. And this, the rents are set. The landlord is waiting on a check from the government. They might get a tenant in, but it's not hurting them in a lot of cases. No. That's not why they got into this. They got into it for a different reason. And you can talk to any landlord that leases out some of their units or all of their units to government subsidized housing, what their incentives are. But they're different than just the private market. I also want to back up a little bit and say, if you haven't started exploring the affordable housing options in your area, you can either start with the Department of Housing or Community Affairs. It's going to depend based on your state. And there's usually a lottery system. Like in Georgia, there's a lottery system. Or you can just start with buildings themselves. In Georgia, the wait list is closed at the Department of Community Affairs. So going back to what we said, they're not even taking any names for the lottery system. So we went through individual landlords and buildings, and it was giving good phone. It was picking up, calling, what's the wait list, when you expect to have occupancies, like that's how we found out vacancies. But if you are in Georgia, there's also a site called georgiahousingsearch.org, which is a directory where landlords who welcome these housing vouchers or subsidized housing can list their units. So some states have started to form different options to solve for the inefficiency, but it's not all states. Just look.
You still have to kind of know how to navigate the system. Like it's not a service.
It's not.
It's not easy, and it's not efficient. It's kind of all over the place. There are new things popping up all the time. So start now.
Yes. And you may know affordable housing as like Section 8, something like that, but it's been rebranded, very similar to how food stamps aren't called food stamps anymore. It's SNAP or EBT. Mm-hmm. The housing program is called Housing Choice Vouchers. So if you are searching online or if you're calling around, that's what you want to ask for. You don't want to ask for Section 8 because, it might come up because it's just SEO, but it's called something different now, and it may not always be a full building. So you want to ask around and see if there's any units. There are some normal apartments, regular apartments that may open up a couple of units to this type of housing for occupancy reasons or because they're empty and it's better than them going empty. But it depends. You really have to ask. In your mom's case, her building has 62 units and 55 of them are reserved for households who are earning at or below 50 or 60% of the area median income. Mm-hmm. So you have to be earning less than half of what everybody else in the area earns. And then the other 7 units are priced at market price, which means you can come in and get them at regular price. Now, what keeps it affordable is that every resident has to be 62 years or older. So even the market price is kind of constrained by the idea that it's only for people who are 62 and older. So there's not all this demand that makes these units more expensive than, a regular apartment. So it's a lot of pieces. And I don't think we would have had as much luck if this were an affordable housing unit that was available to everybody who needed affordable housing in the area.
Right.
The fact that it was age restricted really helped the process move along faster, because I don't think it would have been 9 months. I think it would have been closer to 18 months if we were actually aligned behind the demand that's required.
Yeah, I think for me, the most interesting part about this process was the way that the word income popped up so many times.
That was a
right?
lot
So it
of
was income based. Everything was based on income. And so if you don't have a job and you just have Social Security, you think oh, well, sure, certainly, I qualify. I think that was the case here. Like my mother at the time, she wasn't working and all she had was her Social Security payment. And so in your mind, you think Of course I qualify. Like, why wouldn't I qualify? It's not like I'm, on the higher end of money coming in. Furthermore, there are a lot of people who don't see or think of their Social Security as income, because you almost think of it almost like
I paid for
a benefit payment, right? So it's not actual income. But once you start to enter the wait list and these types of programs, like, that is considered income. I think the other issue to that is if you have money in a retirement account, even if right, like, you're listening to this podcast and just making it up, your mother or father has $50,000 and, you're already stressing out because it's not enough. I hate to tell you, but like, that might be like, they may not even listen to you until you're down to like your last five, if that.
Yes.
Like, these programs are not for people who have $50,000.
Yeah.
Like, you are considered way above the norm there. To your point around what people are earning and the percentage of units that are made available, or the percentage of salary that sets the kind of benchmark for what the rate offering is in these places, like, you would not qualify. And so that was something that we had to deal with as well as just trying to explain it to my mother. And in her case, she was like, I don't know that it can get much worse. And I'm like, well, I mean, according to them, like, you're well off, right?
Yeah.
Like, you are not who these programs are for. And so it's almost as if it's like you've got to wait until things get really, really bad before you even qualify, which is just a scary thought. And so all of that to say, you really want to make sure that you prepare for that mentally, because that can be one of the most jarring things. Like, it's almost like you are being penalized for being somewhat responsible.
Exactly.
And that's what I think makes it so emotionally taxing for everyone involved, not just the person who is in need, but like the people that are supporting them. Because it's like, yeah, there is programs, there are government assistance programs and all these unique things maybe in your community, but they're actually going to prioritize helping people who are significantly worse off than you.
Right.
And if you've got 6 months, 12 months, like, you literally just will not qualify until then. Now, on the back end, there's also just the prep work that has to happen. And I think if you've ever tried to apply for a mortgage, you're somewhat familiar with this process. But I think if you've never had to do that, or if you haven't done that in a while, like, you want to prepare for that as well. And so things like organizing bank statements, retirement, pension, Social Security, like old tax forms, all that stuff, I think is really, really important. And if you're the caregiver, you're the younger person, you're the child that is trying to support the parent, my best advice to you would be to make sure that you are clear that your parent knows how to do those things. Because in our case, this is where a certain level of technological illiteracy started to rear its ugly head. And what happens is, you are in line, you understand the urgency of the situation, but if you have not taken the time to create an online bank account, you're now that person that's calling up someplace. And I mean, God bless you. Like, there are not people at a financial institution, at a bank, at any pension company, like, waiting for someone to call. Right? Like, that's what online dashboards are for. Similar to faxing, right? Like, there were a number of times, God bless her, my mom, was ready and trying to prepare to fax something. And I was like, that can't be this process. Like, I know that's what you are likely drawn to, because in your time, that was probably what was most relevant or the fastest way of doing it. But, that's not how things are done right now. You have to have online access, which also means you got to have a laptop. You got to have a way of storing and organizing those documents and knowing how to email them and so on and so on. So you really want to make sure that you're doing that work. But, you're doing all of this because these are the documents that, in our case, the leasing agent is asking for. And if it's not them asking for it, it's the other link in the chain, which is like some other third-party compliance department that is working on behalf of HUD or something like that. Like, there are all of these parties involved. And so you can go from like making progress and feeling like it's any day now to like losing hope because 2 weeks went by and you'd never heard anything back. And then when you did hear something back, it was about some anomaly or some weird form that that no one mentioned before, but all of a sudden is required because they found a $2, Apple Pay. You guys went that day. I don't know what I was doing.
It was several days.
There were several days, but I know there was one day in particular you guys went, and it was like for every transaction that was flagged. It's not like there's one form and you can write down and it lists all the transactions. It was like, here's a form that explains that penny of Apple Pay, because that's considered income, or that rebate check from contact lens. I'm just making it up because that's the only thing I can think of when it comes to rebate checks. Or what is that $100 there? That's income. Who is that? Where is that? Is that regular? Is that frequent? And it's like a recalculation of your qualification based on every single one of those things. And so you either need to explain them as some type of anomaly, or say, oh, well, no, that this is what that is. And so it's just a constant, grueling, like invasive,
very invasive,
and dare I say demeaning, but I'm trying to be well-rounded here. So I'm also going to throw in necessary
right
process that is required for people who are looking to find affordable and accessible housing as a senior.
Yes.
It's this is the reality of it. So there are a couple of things that I would recommend you do. One is start early. I had planned to say that about 10 times. I think I've only said it maybe 3, but just go ahead and multiply it. Start early. 2, I would say ensure the person you are supporting has online access and manage it for them. Because I'm telling you, you will be faced with such a brutal and heartbreaking reality. And I'm having conversations with older people in my life who are in their 60s right now, who are struggling with things that I consider to be very fundamental. And so I think what you end up realizing is that, wow, I gave someone a little bit more credit than they likely deserved. And again, that's not to knock that person, but I think we brush it off, we laugh about it and say, oh my gosh, they're older, boomer this, boomer that. But when you need them to actually understand how to send an email and they don't know how, or they don't have the ability to, it can create major, major issues and a lot of stress, especially if you're going through this process.
And it's beyond the basics of just sending an email. It's taking an attachment from one email, attaching it to another one, or scanning something that may have come in the mail.
You don't have to go to a Kinko's to do it, right?
Correct.
Like, I'm telling you, like, you can do it on your iPhone. It's understanding how to your point, like how to attach something, how to use the cloud, ensuring that you don't have all of these, deposits and just blowing them off because it's nothing you can do about it. It was like, no, if your friend wants to give you money, do not make it hit your checking account. Make sure it's cash.
Yeah.
Like, do not have those transactions because it's going to make this process worse. And it could be that some unexplained $50 from a well-meaning neighbor
takes you over
becomes
the limit.
The difference between you finding housing that you can afford and not qualifying and being dropped from the wait list and having to find somewhere else.
Yes.
Like, that's how ridiculous and painful this process can be. And I think the last thing I would say is just make that decision early. If you think that they are not financially savvy, I'm telling you right now, you think ripping the Band-Aid off is going to be the most painful part of this? Because, and by that I mean, I think if I go back to where we were, there was a willingness to, like, I don't want to have a bad dinner. I don't want to ruin the weekend. Trust me when I tell you, ruin that weekend. Like, because that is nothing compared to the 9 months, 2 years you might be willing to spend because you were afraid of a sting right now. Like, this is the unfortunate, like, trade-off. So take the sting, take the little punch on the chin now, because, like, that is going to feel like nothing compared to the threat of homelessness 5 years from now or 2 years from now. God willing, there's some type of medical emergency that immediately wipes out any savings that you had, right? So this is, like, why it's such a sensitive issue and such an emotional one.
Yes. I have an aunt in Texas who is starting a similar process, and they told her 6 to 9 months. And I told my mom, like,
oh, no.
Prepare yourself for longer. I remember we were in Chicago talking to Jordan, to Doc G, and he told us that his mom had just come off a 10-year wait list, and she was so excited. She had waited a whole decade to move into affordable housing in the Chicago area. But because there are all these chefs in the kitchen, because people are living longer and needing the housing longer, deadlines and timelines are all a best guess. We got very lucky because it was a new build. She was early. She was like first in line. But all of the deadlines are a best guess. I mean, even in our situation, she had gotten an estimate of when she could move in. And so we went ahead and terminated her lease early, which came with a big old fee. It came with a 60-day notice, anticipating that we would move somewhere in between there. And we did the math, and it was better than like continuing to pay throughout the lease.
Right.
But she didn't move. And so there was a time where she was without a permanent address. Like she didn't have anywhere, to live because she had turned in the keys. And during that time, she had also gotten a job. And so we were just very worried that all of this stuff would fall through. And living with us wasn't an option. Our house could not accommodate it. We looked at extended stays, furnished corporate housing. That stuff wasn't an option. And finally, Julien recommended that she reach out to her network and stay with a friend. And that honestly was the lifeline, because there were many times where she wanted to give up. She was over the back and forth. She was over all of the forms and the invasive questions. And why do they care that I got $65 here? And we're trying to explain, like, that's the program. That's the agreement. That's what you trade in order for this low rent. But it was very difficult.
Yeah. And it makes sense, right? Like looking back, I think, we've spoken a lot about like preparing for the emotional challenge that you have and having that conversation with your parent. But you also have to look at it from their standpoint, which is the embarrassment that they face and having to ask a friend who was not, really like looking to help, but I mean, thankfully was able to. But like this, I think there's a layer of, shame that comes with that, and saying I don't have anywhere to live, or things are really tight, can you help me at your big age. And I think that played a role in it. But even when I think back to like episode 5 of Money on the Table, and we talk about like why it's so important to remove the stigma, and why it's so important to find partners and to like really make the most of the community that you have. I mean, this is in part what inspired that conversation, because we know so many people, obviously we're talking about my mom, but she's not the only one. You have a frat or a sorority, but you're out of a job and you don't reach out to them because you don't want to embarrass yourself and seem like a failure. Or in this case, you're an older person and you're an active member of the church community, but they know you this way, but you don't want to make it seem like, oh my God, I messed up and I need help, right? And so what happens is like they're far more comfortable, reaching out to children and having them be the people who offer that support. And if you are that child and you're able to do it, more power to you. But what we also know is that creates a lot of pressure on you, especially if you're trying to accomplish your own financial goals or maybe save up for a home, etc. And so, all of that to say, I mean, doing the emotional work to have conversations like this and actually make them productive, I think is really, really a part of what we're hoping listeners and viewers kind of unlock out of this. I can't tell you what to say. I can just share with you our experience and hope that we've can kind of file down any sense of like optimism that you might have. I wish I could be more optimistic and say it's a super simple process. It's not. And so if anything, I'm hoping to create some urgency for you as an individual, or for you as an individual to have that conversation with a partner, your partner, and then to have that conversation or figure out a way to have a productive conversation with that adult. Because I know for sure respecting the lines of privacy is not a good decision. Like you really want to have an understanding of the actual issue, how urgent it is, start getting all of those documents in line. I mean, we have a whole folder, at least I do. Like there's a whole folder in the Google Drive, right? All the documents, all the forms, all the information that you need, because, you just realize like, they need help. And they're not really well equipped to navigate this world. I mean, going back to some of the issues that were highlighted in that AARP report, and that's just the mega trends, right? That's not to say there aren't smaller ones that are just as relevant or might actually be at the front door of your particular family. And so, it's tough. And, we had some tough conversations. I remember asking her a couple of times, like, because it felt like, to your point, like she was just really willing to give up. And that was one of the saddest things that I ever see. It was like, why, or how, or
And I
like,
think I have a theory about it, because I think when you reach a certain age, how you feel about the future versus how we feel about the future, where there's a level of certainty that we feel, and it's like, you got to do this because, in the next 5 years, and they're like, 5 years, like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And so that disconnect, especially if you're talking about elders in communities that have historically low lifespans. So when you look at the lifespan of Black people in general, it's lower than white folks. And so age, if you've outlived your parents, will impact what decisions you feel like you need to make. And then when you couple that with this tension of not getting what you want, it causes this blind spot, this almost like a frustration.
It was hopelessness to me. I think
Yeah.
that's what when I react the way that I did, it's not because I didn't understand. It was that, it's the challenge of seeing hopelessness
Yes.
in someone's eyes, which is a really, really difficult thing to see and hear and feel. It's like a loss of hope is so difficult. But I don't know. Like, I think back. I remember the first time I really needed to be confronted with it, and it was when I think we're going through like the final edits in the manuscript for Cashing Out. And shout out to Nina Rodriguez, who was one of the editors on the book. And I think she was like the final editor towards the end. And she was asking us like a bigger question. She was like, what's at stake here? I remember her asking that. And I was like, what do you mean? Because we were talking about, like, you got to do these things. You got to save. You got to pay off the debt. You got to invest because things can get really, really bad. She was like what? Like, tell me, like, what happens? What happens if people don't take your advice? I think she phrased it up just like that. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, I was still almost like in denial.
Be homeless.
Like, what do you mean? And I was like, oh, wait, that's a real question. And the answer was like, yeah, you'll be homeless. Like, that's what happens. Like, you lose it all. And you will be faced with the brutal reality of how thin or non-existent
and violent
this system is. The support system is. There's nothing there. So you will die homeless. And I was like, oh, we don't talk about that enough.
We don't. We assume
we just assume
the
that,
safety
right?
net has enough room for everybody.
You will be homeless.
And that there's always something there. And it's like, it's not. If you do not have the income to qualify, you don't have a child that can co-sign, you don't live in an area where there are new builds, you don't have a grocery store that is willing to employ someone your age. If you don't have all of these things that we're considering lucky, because it could have gone very different, you end up homeless.
Yeah. I remember doing the research really quickly to make sure that we raised the stakes in the book for the purposes of answering that question, and doing a little bit of cursory research on homelessness and finding out that, as much as we want to believe that these things are driven by addiction or driven by, even mental illness, like most cases of homelessness in this country are actually driven by medical debt.
Yes.
Right? It's like the
inability to pay property taxes.
Happened, correct. That you did not have a choice. You were forced to make some really difficult decisions. And that set off a series of events that ultimately led to you losing your home or not being able to afford rent. And the shame or the unwillingness to ask for help leads people to try to find temporary solutions. And then you just find themselves stumbling over and over again. And that hopelessness, I think, sets in, and that's what happens. And so all of that to say, we were fortunate, very fortunate to, one, I think, have a good working relationship to be able to say, I'm going to work on this, you work on this, and we can just kind of keep these households afloat without having any disruption to, our quality of life for the most part, our son still being good. My mom was very fortunate that that place popped up when it did, that we had the wherewithal to support her through that process, although it wasn't easy. And I think this is a good place to end, because otherwise it'll just turn into the saddest episode ever. But it's not funny, and I'm not, even trying to make light of the situation, but this is one of those issues that I think really highlights our understanding of our audience. And by that, I mean, they are some of the smartest and brightest, and in many cases, hopeful people we've ever met.
Resourceful, yes.
Resourceful, but I don't know that we're fully equipped to deal with this.
I don't think so.
This is different. This is not a tough project at work. This is not a real estate project. This is a full-scale,
persistent,
expensive, complicated. I mean, you don't know complexity or bureaucracy until you're dealing with this. Invasive. It's all of the things. It's arguably one of the hardest problems you will ever have to solve. I remember when you put it out there on X, and there were so many people who knew, right? There were the people who knew and said, oh my God, it was almost like, you want to talk about like divorce parties that people have?
Yeah.
There should be, without question, like, hey, I found my parent affordable senior housing party. Because like when that day comes, like you can take, and even then, it's like a brief sigh of relief.
Breath.
That's how bad it is. Because as fortunate as we are, and as fortunate as she was, I'm still kind of like looking at it sideways, like, I feel like.
Because again, the incentives aren't there for these owners, landlords, management companies. These are not perfect places to live.
Correct.
They're, and it doesn't remove you from all of the emotions that still come with living on the edge. You know what I'm saying? Like, housing is not a right in this country.
Yeah.
You're not guaranteed it. It doesn't matter what you've done. Even if you are a veteran, even if you are someone who worked for 45 years and was it doesn't matter.
They don't care.
They don't care. And it's unfortunate. And as y'all know, our answer is to burn the candle at both ends. Prepare your household to be able to fight back, but also leverage that civic and political power that you have. Make sure that the policies are in place. Make sure that you're applying pressure to all of the organizations. Make sure that you're supporting the grassroots organizers who are trying to solve this at local levels. You got to do both, because otherwise, if it's not your parent, then it's a friend or a family member, or it could be the next whoever you're counting on to rescue your kid. Like, all of these people fall through the cracks, and it's not because they're bad people or because they're not talented or because they don't have something to contribute. It's because we're okay with it. And that just shouldn't be the case. Like, it shouldn't be the case.
Yeah. All
right, y'all.
Well,
I ain't got no joke this time.
No. But thank you for listening to another episode of the Rich and Regular podcast. If you liked what you heard, which God bless you if you did, we'd appreciate a 5-star rating and review. Anyway, leave us a comment. If you have any other resources, any programs in the local Atlanta area specifically, drop them on the comments. Comment on a reel, comment on the YouTube video, send us a note. I want to make sure that we're also presenting as many resources as we can. Yes. I know Lynette Kalfani Cox wrote her book, and it's filled with resources again. And so if you want to look back on that interview, there are tons of government programs and things that she recommended there. But
even if you're not in the Atlanta area, y'all know where you are. Yeah. Dallas, DC, LA, Oakland, Chicago, like New York. Shout it out in the comments. If you know something or a resource or you have a tip, shout it out, because we all we got.
That's it.
See y'all next week. If you like videos like this and want to see more, make sure you click subscribe and turn on notifications.